A simple act of kindness. Ethan sat on a cold rock, staring at the remains of his broken ship. The silver metal was bent and burned, smoke still rising from the wreck. His communicator was dead, and his food supplies were almost gone. The air on this strange planet was thin, but at least it was breathable. The sky above him was a deep purple, and two small suns cast long shadows on the rocky ground. His stomach growled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his last piece of food, a small chocolate bar. The wrapper was torn, but the chocolate inside was still good. He sighed. It wasn't much, but it would have to last. Then he heard something, a rustling sound. Soft, shaky breathing. Ethan turned his head, scanning the ruins around him. Broken buildings stood like skeletons, covered in dust and vines. This place had once been a city, but now it was silent and empty. Or maybe, not completely empty. He stood up slowly. "Hello," his voice echoed in the still air. No answer. He took a few steps forward, his boots crunching against the cracked ground. The sound came again, this time, closer. Behind a fallen pillar, he saw a small figure curled up, barely moving. Ethan's heart pounded. It was an alien girl. She looked no older than 10, her thin body covered in dirt and scratches. Her skin was pale blue, her silver hair tangled and messy. Her clothes were torn, barely hanging onto her fragile frame. But what caught Ethan's attention the most were her eyes, large, glowing faintly, filled with fear and exhaustion. She was starving. Her breathing was weak, her small hands trembling as she clutched her stomach. Ethan could see her ribs, sharp and thin beneath her skin. She had been hiding here for a long time, alone and afraid. Ethan took a slow step forward. "Hey, it's okay. I won't hurt you." The girl flinched, pressing herself against the pillar. Her body shook like a cornered animal. Ethan's heart ached. He knew that look: fear, hunger, desperation. He had seen it before, long ago, in the eyes of a lost child on a war-torn colony. Carefully, he knelt down and held out his chocolate bar. The girl's glowing eyes locked onto it. Her breathing hitched. Ethan unwrapped it, breaking off a small piece. "It's food," he said gently. "Go on. Take it." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers, thin and bony, touched the chocolate. She hesitated, then snatched it from his hand and stuffed it into her mouth. Her lips closed around it. She chewed. And then, something changed. Her eyes widened. Her breath quickened. A faint glow spread across her skin, pulsing like a heartbeat. Ethan stared in shock as her frail body began to change. Her skin shimmered, her cuts healing instantly. Her trembling stopped, her weak limbs growing stronger. The air around her hummed with energy, a strange power Ethan couldn't explain. She gasped, clutching her chest, as if something inside her had awakened. Ethan stepped back, his pulse racing. What was happening? The girl looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with something new. Not fear, not hunger, but realization. "You," she whispered, her voice shaky but clear. "You don't know what you've done." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at the chocolate bar in his hand, then back at her. What had he done? Before he could ask, a loud sound echoed in the distance. Heavy footsteps. Metal clanking. The girl's eyes went wide with terror. "No," she whispered, looking around in panic. "They found me." Ethan's heart pounded. "Who?" The girl grabbed his wrist, her grip much stronger now. "We have to run. Now." Ethan turned toward the ruins, toward the sound of approaching danger. And for the first time since he crashed, he realized he was no longer alone. The girl's shocking transformation. Ethan barely had time to process what had just happened. One moment, he had handed a starving alien girl a small piece of chocolate. The next, her entire body had begun to change before his eyes. She sat there, trembling, her pale blue skin now glowing faintly in the dim light of the ruined city. The scratches and bruises that covered her frail body vanished, as if they had never existed. Her dull silver hair took on a soft shimmer, and her once weak limbs no longer shook with exhaustion. She was breathing differently now, stronger, steadier. Ethan felt his heart race. What just happened? The girl looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers in awe. She was just as shocked as he was. Then she turned to him, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what you've done." Ethan's stomach twisted. That wasn't the reaction he had expected. He had given her food, that was all. She was starving. He just helped. But why did she look terrified? Before he could ask, a loud sound shattered the silence. A deep metallic hum echoed across the ruins. It vibrated through the cracked ground beneath them, sending small pebbles rolling down broken stone steps. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and growing closer. The girl's entire body went rigid. Her glowing eyes darted toward the direction of the sound. She grabbed Ethan's wrist so tightly that he winced. "They found me," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. Ethan turned his head, scanning the ancient ruins. The once empty streets were now filled with eerie, shifting shadows. A strange red light flickered from behind the broken pillars. Then they appeared. Massive armored figures, marching in perfect formation. Ethan instinctively ducked lower, pulling the girl with him behind a fallen stone slab. He peered over the edge, his breath caught in his throat. There were at least 6 of them, each standing well over 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in thick, black armor that gleamed under the twin suns. Their helmets were smooth, featureless, except for a single burning red visor across their faces. One of them stepped forward, raising a large mechanical gauntlet. A deep, unnatural voice rumbled through the ruins. "Scan the area. The last one must be eliminated." Ethan felt the girl flinch beside him. He could hear her quick, uneven breaths, her body tense like a trapped animal. He turned to her, whispering urgently, "Who are they?" She shook her head. "No time. We have to move." Ethan hesitated. He was still trying to process everything. Who she was, why she was hiding, why these armored giants wanted her dead. But before he could ask another question, she suddenly reached out and touched his forehead. A shock ran through his body. His vision blurred for a split second, then sharpened. He could hear everything. The shifting of the soldiers' armor, the whirring hum of their weapons, even the distant rustling of wind through the ruins. But more than that, he felt her fear. Not just fear of being caught, but fear of what would happen if she was. Something deep inside him told him this wasn't just a simple chase. This was a hunt, a purge. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had survived wars, disasters, and even a near-fatal crash on this planet. But this girl was alone, and these monsters wanted her gone. He wasn't going to let that happen. Not after what he just saw. He grabbed her hand. "Come on." Without another word, they ran. The chase. They darted through the ruins, weaving between crumbling walls and broken pillars. Ethan moved as fast as he could, but the girl was faster. Whatever had happened when she ate that chocolate, it had given her strength. The soldiers moved like machines, their heavy boots pounding against the stone. A sharp, robotic voice rang out. "Target detected. Engage." A bright red laser beam shot past Ethan's head, striking the pillar beside him. The stone exploded into dust, sending shards flying in every direction. The girl yanked him to the left, pulling him down an old vine-covered tunnel. They slid down a steep slope, landing hard on the rocky ground below. Ethan groaned, pushing himself up. The girl was already on her feet, her glowing eyes scanning the darkness. Ethan coughed. "Next time, warn me before you do that." She ignored him, her expression still filled with panic. "They won't stop." Ethan wiped dust from his face. "What do they want from you?" She hesitated. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then, in a small voice, she said, "They don't want me. They want me gone." Ethan frowned. That doesn't make any sense. The girl looked down at her hands. They were still faintly glowing, the light pulsing like a heartbeat. She took a shaky breath. "I wasn't supposed to survive." Ethan stared at her. His mind raced with questions, but before he could ask, another loud explosion shook the tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling. The girl's eyes widened. "They found us." Ethan clenched his fists. No way in hell was he letting those things take her. He turned to the girl, determination burning in his eyes. "Then let's make sure we survive. The hunters arrive." The ground trembled beneath their feet as Ethan and the alien girl sprinted through the dark, vine-covered tunnels. The walls around them were cracked and old, covered in strange glowing symbols that pulsed faintly, casting an eerie blue light. Ethan's breath was ragged, his muscles aching, but the girl ran ahead of him, barely showing signs of exhaustion. Whatever had happened to her after eating that chocolate, it had changed her. Behind them, the deep mechanical hum of the Drekvar hunters echoed through the tunnels. Their heavy boots stomped in perfect rhythm, their metallic voices cold and unforgiving. "Target detected. Proceed with termination." A red laser beam shot past Ethan's shoulder, exploding against the tunnel wall in a burst of dust and sparks. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan yelled as he ducked. The girl grabbed his wrist, pulling him down a narrow passage. "We have to keep moving." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Yeah, I figured that much." They ran deeper into the ruins, twisting through ancient corridors and jumping over collapsed structures. But no matter how fast they moved, the hunters didn't stop. They weren't just chasing. They were hurting them. Trapped like prey. Ethan slowed down, realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. He grabbed the girl's arm, forcing her to stop. "Wait, this isn't right. They're not just following us. They're leading us somewhere." The girl's glowing eyes flickered with fear. "What?" Ethan glanced around. The tunnel had opened into a wide chamber, filled with towering stone pillars covered in ancient carvings. The air felt colder here, heavy with something unseen. That's when he noticed it. There were no other exits. His heart sank. It was a trap. A deep mechanical voice echoed from above. "Caught." Ethan spun around, fists clenched. From the shadows, the Drekvar hunters stepped forward, their massive black armor gleaming under the pale blue light. One by one, they emerged, forming a perfect semicircle around them. Ethan counted 8. 8 of them, each carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The girl took a step back, her entire body tense. The tallest of the hunters, their apparent leader, took a slow step forward. His red visor glowed like a burning star, scanning both of them. Then, in a cold, mechanical voice, he spoke. "Final survivor of the Yilari race, you have been found. You will be erased." Ethan's blood turned to ice. The last of her kind. Ethan turned to the girl. "Final survivor? What is he talking about?" The girl didn't answer. Her small hands clenched into fists, her glowing eyes locked onto the hunter leader. The hunter raised his weapon. "The extinction of your kind must be completed." Ethan felt something in him snap. Extinction. That word hit like a knife to the gut. These monsters weren't just after her. They had already wiped out her people. They weren't hunting her. They were finishing the job. Ethan stepped in front of her without thinking. "Like hell you will." The hunter paused, tilting his head slightly. His voice remained cold, emotionless. "You are insignificant, human. Step aside." Ethan clenched his fists, standing his ground. "No." A moment of silence stretched between them. Then the hunter raised his arm, and a blade shot out from his gauntlet, humming with dark energy. He was going to kill Ethan first. The girl gasped. Her entire body flared with a sudden surge of energy, her silver hair rising slightly as the glow around her skin intensified. She stepped forward. "No." Ethan barely had time to react before the air exploded with power. The awakening. A wave of unseen energy blasted outward, slamming into the Drekvar hunters. The leader stumbled back, his armor sparking. The others crashed against the stone walls, their red visors flickering as they tried to recover. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The girl was floating. Her feet had left the ground, her body glowing brighter than before. Her silver hair flowed as if caught in a powerful wind, even though the air in the chamber was still. The ancient carvings on the walls lit up, responding to her presence. The entire room seemed to come alive. The Drekvar leader looked up at her, his visor flickering with unreadable data. "Impossible," he muttered. Ethan took a step back, shielding his eyes from the bright glow surrounding the girl. He barely recognized her now. She was no longer the scared, starving child he had found in the ruins. She was something else entirely. The girl slowly lowered herself back to the ground, her glowing eyes locking onto the hunters. "You took everything from me," she whispered. Her voice was different now, stronger, layered with something ancient and powerful. The hunters began to recalculate, their cold voices whispering among themselves. Power level unknown, adjusting parameters. New threat detected. Proceed with maximum force. The leader pointed at her. Eliminate her immediately. The hunters raised their weapons. Ethan grabbed the girl's hand. "We need to get out of here. Now." She didn't move. She just lifted her hand. A shockwave of energy blasted through the chamber, sending the hunters flying. Their heavy bodies smashed against the stone pillars, sparks flying from their armor. Ethan stared. She wasn't running anymore. She was fighting. The girl turned to him, her glowing gaze steady. "I am the last," she said, "but I will not be erased." Ethan nodded. "Then let's finish this." The hunters began to recover, their weapons charging. The girl clenched her fists. And for the first time in her life, she stopped running. She was ready to fight. Escape and the truth. The air was thick with dust and energy. The ruins trembled, ancient pillars cracking under the force of the battle that had just begun. The girl stood at the center of it all, her glowing silver eyes locked onto the Drekvar hunters, her once weak body now pulsing with unseen power. Ethan's heart pounded. He had no idea what she was, but one thing was clear: she wasn't a helpless child anymore. And yet they were still outnumbered. The hunters recalibrated, their red visors flickering as they adjusted to the girl's sudden transformation. The leader raised his gauntlet, his voice calm but filled with lethal intent. Threat level recalculated. Adjusting tactics. Full elimination required. Ethan's stomach twisted. They weren't going to stop. The girl raised her hands, and the air shimmered with raw energy. The carvings on the walls glowed brighter, responding to her presence. Ethan could feel the very fabric of the room humming with power. Then, in an instant, everything exploded. A wave of light blasted outward, knocking the hunters off their feet. Their heavy armor sparked as they hit the ground, weapons clattering. The entire chamber trembled, deep cracks running through the stone walls. Ethan grabbed the girl's wrist. "That was amazing, but we need to go. Now." She looked at him, breathing heavily. For a moment, Ethan thought she might fight. But then, her glowing eyes flickered, and she stumbled. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. "Hey, what's wrong?" She blinked up at him, her light fading slightly. I can't hold it for long." That was all Ethan needed to hear. Behind them, the hunters were already recovering. Their mechanical voices whispered to each other, recalibrating strategies. Ethan hoisted the girl onto his back. "All right, kid. Hold on tight." And then he ran. The underground chase. The tunnels twisted and turned, the dim blue light from the ancient carvings guiding Ethan as he sprinted through the ruins. Behind him, the thundering footsteps of the Drekvar hunters grew louder. The girl's breathing was ragged against his back. You don't have to do this." Ethan snorted. "Oh, what, leave you behind?" "Yeah, Not happening. She was silent for a moment. Then, in a small voice, she whispered, "Nobody's ever protected me before." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know what had happened to her, how she had ended up alone in these ruins, starving and hunted. But one thing was clear. She had been alone for a long time. Not anymore. A dead end, or a secret. Ethan turned a sharp corner and skidded to a stop. His heart sank. A wall, a massive ancient stone door blocked the tunnel. It was covered in strange markings, glowing faintly, just like the ones inside the chamber. The girl stirred. "Put me down." Ethan hesitated, then did as she asked. She stumbled forward, placing a small hand against the stone. The symbols flared to life. Ethan's eyes widened as the stone began to shift. A deep rumble echoed through the tunnel as the door split in half, revealing a hidden passage beyond. The girl turned back to him. "Come on." Ethan grinned. "Now that's a useful trick." They slipped inside just as the first Drekvar hunter rounded the corner. The door sealed shut behind them. The truth revealed. For a long moment, there was only silence. Ethan let out a breath. "Okay, I think we lost them." He turned to the girl. She was leaning against the wall, still weak but slowly recovering. Now that they had a moment to breathe, Ethan finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Who are you?" The girl hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "My name is Lyra. I am the last of the Yilari." Ethan frowned. "Yilari?" She nodded. "My people. We weren't like others. We didn't build ships or weapons. We were connected to the world around us. The air, the ground, even the stars. They all gave us strength." Ethan crossed his arms. "Okay, but that doesn't explain why those guys are trying to kill you." Lyra lowered her gaze. Then she said something that made Ethan's blood run cold. "Because of what I can become." Ethan stiffened. "What does that mean?" Lyra took a slow breath. "My kind, we were born with a dormant energy inside us. It only awakens under certain conditions. For me, that condition was something inside that chocolate." Ethan blinked. "Wait, you're telling me that my chocolate bar activated your powers?" She nodded. "It contained something that my body had been missing. When I ate it, I changed." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Great, so I accidentally triggered the ultimate superweapon with a piece of candy." Lyra flinched at that word. "I'm not a weapon." Ethan sighed. "I didn't mean it like that. But that's how they see you, isn't it?" She nodded. Ethan leaned against the wall, thinking. This wasn't just some random hunt. The Drekvar hunters weren't after Lyra because of what she was now. They were after her because of what she could become. A promise in the darkness. Lyra looked up at him. Her silver eyes were filled with something Ethan hadn't seen before. "Hope. You don't have to stay," she said softly. "You could run. They're after me, not you." Ethan met her gaze, and he knew, in that moment, that there was no way in hell he was leaving. He crouched down so they were eye level. "Listen, kid, I don't know much about fate or destiny or any of that. But I do know this, you're not alone anymore." Lyra blinked. "You'd risk your life for me." Ethan grinned. "I already did, didn't I?" Lyra stared at him for a moment. Then, for the first time, she smiled. A small, fragile smile, but real. Ethan stood up, stretching. "All right. If those guys want to fight, we're gonna make sure they regret it." Lyra's eyes glowed faintly. "How?" Ethan smirked. "I've got a few ideas." Behind them, the ruins trembled. The Drekvar hunters were coming. But this time, Ethan and Lyra weren't just going to run. They were going to fight. The last of her kind. Ethan leaned against the cold stone wall, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His entire body ached, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The battle had been nothing short of chaos. The girl, who had once been frail and weak, had unleashed a storm of power, sending the Drekvar hunters scattering like insects. But it wasn't over. He turned his gaze to her. She stood at the center of the ancient ruins, her small hands clenched into fists, her silver hair flowing as if caught in an unseen wind. The glow around her body had not faded. If anything, it had intensified. She looked different now. Stronger, more alive, more dangerous. Ethan swallowed hard. He had seen many things in his time as a traveler, but this was something beyond explanation. The girl exhaled slowly, her glowing eyes fixed on the distant remains of the battlefield. The bodies of the fallen Drekvar soldiers lay scattered among the ruins, their black armor sparking, their red visors flickering. Those who had survived had flowed into the darkness, retreating into the endless tunnels beneath the city. For the first time, in who knew how long, she was no longer running. She had won, but she didn't look relieved. She looked haunted. Ethan pushed himself off the wall, stepping toward her. What was that? The girl remained silent. Ethan's voice softened. What are you? She finally turned to him. Her glowing eyes searched his face, as if trying to decide whether she should tell him the truth. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. I am the last. Ethan frowned. The last of what? She looked up at the sky, at the twin suns burning in the distance. The last Elari. Ethan had heard many names in his travels, many species, many civilizations, but that one, it was unfamiliar, like a ghost from a forgotten time. She continued, her voice heavy with something Ethan couldn't quite name. My people, we were once many. Our cities stretched across the stars. Our power was limitless. We were meant to ascend beyond the flesh, to become something more than bodies, more than war, more than death. She hesitated. But they feared us. Ethan stiffened. Who? Her gaze darkened. The Drekvar. The ones who hunted us. The ones who destroyed us. Ethan clenched his fists. He had seen enough wars to know how they started. The strong feared the unknown. They feared power they couldn't control. And they destroyed what they feared. They wiped out your entire species. His voice was quiet, but the anger beneath it burned. The girl nodded. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his dust-covered hair. How did you survive? She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. I was too young to fight, too weak. My mother, she hid me. She placed me in deep stasis, buried beneath the ruins of our last city. She thought I would be safe, but I slept for too long. Ethan's heart sank. How long? She looked at him then, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. 1,000 years. Silence stretched between them. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. 1,000 years. An entire millennium. She had woken up in a universe that had long forgotten her people. He suddenly understood the look in her eyes. She wasn't just alone. She was the only one left. And they still found you. His voice was low, edged with anger. She nodded. They never stopped looking. They couldn't allow even one of us to exist. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had seen cruelty before, but this was erasure. And yet, she had survived, not just because she had been hidden. Because of him. His mind flashed back to that moment, when she had eaten the chocolate, when her body had changed, when her energy had awakened. He narrowed his eyes. The chocolate. What did it do to you? She took a deep breath, her gaze flickering with something close to sorrow. My body was incomplete. The Yilari. We were created to evolve. But we needed something small, something rare, to trigger that evolution. Without it, we remained weak, dormant, unfinished. Ethan's heart pounded, and that something was in the chocolate. She gave him a sad smile. A simple compound, something your species never thought much of. But for me, it was everything. Ethan stared at her. The weight of it hit him like a freight train. He had saved her entire existence with a chocolate bar. It would have been almost funny if it wasn't so horrifying. Before he could respond, the wind shifted. The girl snapped her head up, her glow flickering. Ethan tensed. What? She turned her gaze toward the distant ruins, her expression hardening. They're coming back. Ethan spun around. In the distance, beyond the rubble, he saw it. A dark shadow moving across the horizon. A ship. A massive looming structure, its shape almost insect-like, its engines humming with raw energy. A Drekar warship. Ethan's stomach dropped. They weren't done hunting. The girl squared her shoulders. I won't run anymore. Ethan looked at her, this small, glowing girl who had lost everything, who had spent 1,000 years asleep in the ruins of her people, who had just barely begun to understand the power inside her. And for the first time, he saw it. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a spark, a single ember waiting to ignite. Ethan took a deep breath and rolled his shoulders. Good. He cracked a small smile. Because I was getting tired of running too. The warship grew closer. The air vibrated with the hum of its engines. Ethan turned to the girl. So, what do we do now? She looked at him. And for the first time she smiled. We fight. The final battle. The sky darkened as the Drekar warship loomed over the ruins, its massive silhouette blocking out the twin suns. Ethan could feel the vibration of its engines deep in his chest, a low, menacing hum that sent a chill through the air. The girl, the last Yllari, stood beside him, her silver hair flowing as waves of energy pulsed around her body. She wasn't running anymore. And neither was he. Ethan clenched his fists. We need a plan. The girl's glowing eyes narrowed. We need to destroy that ship. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's not a plan. That's suicide. She didn't blink. Then we died fighting. Ethan exhaled sharply, glancing at the massive warship. It was no ordinary vessel. It was a Drekar extermination carrier, built for planetary destruction. If it was here, then that meant they weren't just after her anymore. They were here to wipe out this entire ruin, just to be sure. Ethan gritted his teeth. No, he wouldn't let that happen. He turned to the girl. All right, we don't fight to die. We fight to win. Tell me, what else can you do? She hesitated, glancing at her hands. I don't know. My power. It's waking up. But I don't know its limits. Ethan smirked. Then I guess we find out. The assault begins. The warship's hull split open, and from within, the Drekar soldiers descended. Dozens of them. Black-armored 7-foot giants, their red visors burning in the dim light. They landed in perfect formation, their heavy boots cracking the stone beneath them. They raised their weapons, the air humming with charged energy. Their leader, a massive figure clad in silver-plated armor, stepped forward. His voice was calm, cold. Surrender the anomaly. The girl stood tall, her entire body glowing brighter, her feet hovering slightly above the ground. I am not an anomaly. I am Yllari. The Drekar leader tilted his head slightly. Then you will be erased. He raised his arm, and the war began. The storm unleashed. The first shot was fired. Ethan lunged to the side as a red energy blast obliterated the ground where he had just been standing. He rolled behind a broken pillar, his heart pounding. This was bad. The girl, however, did not move. Instead, she lifted her hand. The moment she did, the air shook. A pulse of white energy exploded outward, knocking back the front line of Drekar soldiers. Their black armor sparked, their visors flickered wildly as they struggled to regain balance. The Drekar leader did not falter. He stepped forward through the energy surge, raising his weapon once more. Your kind was a mistake. The girl's eyes blazed. And yet, here I stand. She thrust both hands forward, and the world erupted. A storm of energy burst from her body, ripping through the battlefield. The sky cracked with light as the ruins trembled under the force of her awakening power. The ground split apart, massive stone slabs rising into the air as if gravity itself had broken. The Drekvar soldiers charged through the chaos. Ethan gritted his teeth. They weren't going to stop. No matter how much power she had, they would keep coming. This wasn't just a fight. It was a war of extinction. Ethan spotted a Drekvar sniper taking position behind a crumbled wall, his rifle locking onto the girl. Not on my watch. Ethan sprinted forward, leaping over fallen debris. He grabbed a piece of metal wreckage from an old ship and hurled it at the sniper, knocking the rifle from his hands. The soldier turned, surprised, just in time for Ethan's fist to slam into his visor. The helmet cracked as the soldier stumbled backward, his armor sparking. Ethan grabbed his rifle, flipping it in his hands before leveling it at another approaching Drekvar. "Hey, ugly!" Ethan shouted. The soldier turned just as Ethan fired. A red bolt of energy slammed into his chest, sending him crashing into a pile of rubble. Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Not bad. But there was no time to celebrate. Above them, the warship began to charge its main cannon. The sky burns. A low whining sound filled the air. The warship's underbelly glowed red, heat distorting the air around it. They were preparing to fire. Ethan's stomach dropped. They're going to wipe this place out. The girl turned toward the ship. Her glow pulsed violently, her hands curling into fists. No, not this time. She launched into the air. Ethan could barely believe what he was seeing. She wasn't just flying. She was moving like a comet, streaking toward the massive ship at impossible speed. The warship fired. A massive beam of red energy screamed down toward the ruins, aiming straight for Ethan and the remaining Drekvar soldiers. Ethan barely had time to move. The entire world lit up in a burning wave of destruction. But before the blast could hit, the girl appeared in front of it. She raised both hands, and the beam stopped in midair. Ethan watched in awe as the raw power of the warship's cannon bent around her like a river hitting a dam. The energy crackled, splintering into lightning-like veins as she held it back with nothing but her will. Then, with a cry, she turned the blast back on the ship. The massive warship reeled, its shields flickering wildly as it took its own attack head-on. Explosions rippled across its hull. The engines stuttered, flames bursting from the sides. Ethan saw his chance. He grabbed the fallen sniper rifle, aimed for the exposed thrusters, and fired. The shot hit its mark. The warship's engines exploded, sending the entire vessel into a violent downward spiral. The Drekvar soldiers screamed as their own ship crashed into the ruins, fire and smoke consuming everything. For the first time in centuries, the Drekvar had lost. The last stand. Ethan coughed, stumbling through the rubble. His ears were ringing, his body sore, but he was alive. He looked up and saw the girl hovering above the wreckage, the glow around her slowly fading. She landed gently, her silver hair settling around her shoulders. Her glowing eyes met his. For the first time, she looked at peace. Ethan grinned, wiping dust from his face. Well, that was dramatic. She gave a small smile. It's over. Ethan glanced at the burning wreckage of the Drekvar warship. For now. She nodded. For now. The two of them stood side by side, watching the smoke rise into the alien sky. She was the last of her kind. But now, she wasn't alone anymore. A new beginning. The ruins were quiet now. Smoke curled into the sky from the wreckage of the Drekvar warship, its twisted metal skeleton half buried beneath stone and rubble. The air smelled of burned circuits and scorched earth. The war was over. For the first time in 1,000 years, the last Yllari stood on a battlefield without running. She had won. But victory felt strange. She hovered slightly above the broken ground, her silver hair swaying gently in the breeze. The glow around her had dimmed now, no longer a storm of untamed power, but a steady, quiet radiance. She was whole, but she was also alone. Her glowing eyes scanned the wreckage, searching for one person. Then she saw him. A survivor's resolve. Ethan pushed himself up from the rubble, coughing. His jacket was torn, his face covered in dust. But he was alive. He winced as he tested his bruised ribs, muttering to himself. Next time, less explosions. The girl landed beside him, tilting her head slightly. You are not built for battle. Ethan gave a weak chuckle. Yeah, I figured that out the hard way. She extended a hand. He hesitated for a moment, then took it. The moment their fingers touched, a warm pulse of energy surged through him. His pain dulled, his aching muscles relaxing as if an unseen force was healing him. Ethan's eyes widened. You can do that too. She looked at her hands, as if noticing it for the first time. I don't know how. Ethan smirked. I guess you're full of surprises. The girl remained silent for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the sky. The twin suns were beginning to set, painting the horizon in deep shades of violet and gold. The same sky she had seen before she went into stasis. A sky that had once belonged to her people. Ethan noticed her expression. That distant, hollow look. He took a breath. You okay? The girl hesitated. Then softly, she spoke. My people should be standing here. Ethan didn't respond right away. Because what could he say? She had lost everything. A civilization wiped from history. A family that would never return. 1,000 years stolen from her. Ethan had seen loss before. He had lost friends in battles, lost places he once called home. But this was beyond loss. This was erasure. The weight of 1,000 years. I was supposed to wake up to a world where my people thrived, she whispered. But I woke up, alone. Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. He wasn't good with words. He wasn't a hero or a warrior. He was just a man who had survived. And now so was she. You're not alone. She looked at him, her glowing eyes searching his face. Ethan shrugged. You got me. A flicker of something crossed her expression, something that almost looked like hope. She turned away, her gaze locked on the ruins of her world. Even if I am the last, my people's memory doesn't have to die. Ethan nodded. Then we make sure it doesn't. She looked at him. How? Ethan smiled slightly. We start by getting off this rock. A future unwritten. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the sun dip below the jagged mountains. Then the girl extended her hand. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's this? A bond, she said simply. Yllari do not survive alone. We survive together. Ethan hesitated, then grinned. I'm guessing this is more than just a handshake. She didn't smile, but something in her glowing eyes softened. Ethan took her hand. The moment he did, energy surged through him. Not painful, not overwhelming, but warm, steady, powerful. A glowing mark etched itself onto his palm, a swirling pattern of ancient Yllari symbols. It pulsed once, then faded, leaving only the faint warmth behind. Ethan stared at it. Ha! The girl tilted her head. It means you are now part of my story. Ethan smirked. Guess that means you're part of mine too. She nodded. For the first time, she had someone to walk forward with. For the first time in 1,000 years, she wasn't the last. She was the first of a new beginning. And as they stood beneath the burning sky, the wind carrying whispers of an old civilization long gone, Ethan knew this was only the start. A single chocolate bar had saved a life. And that life might just change the fate of the universe.